When I was 19, I was a Venture Scout. It's sort of like Boy Scouts, only for older kids, and it's gender mixed. I decided to go to this week-long mixed scouting crew camping trip with a friend of mine. But a few days before going, my friend from Venture Scouts bailed, so I'd be going up into the mountains alone with a bunch of strangers, which was no big deal for me. I can handle myself. When I got there, I was the only Venture Scout, and the only girl. It was a little awkward, but most of the Boy Scouts were pretty nice and easy to get along with. Although they weren't used to camping with a girl, they happily accepted me as just one of the guys. But there was this one guy, Danny. From the first day of camp, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. He'd just stare at me. It was a little uncomfortable, yeah, but I figured he was just socially inept with girls or something, and I tried to pay him no mind. The next day, while we were hiking, we all split off into pairs, and it turned out I was paired with Danny. He looked a little too excited about the idea of hiking with me alone. His eyes always seemed a little too wide, a bit crazy looking, but he was a small guy. Spindly, unkempt hair, a little shorter than I was at 5'7". I figured I'd be able to take him out in a fight if he tried anything, so I didn't raise a fuss about it. Before settling out to the hike, he kept asking me if I needed help putting on my sunscreen. Even though I kept declining, he kept pushing the question and tried to put sunscreen on me until one of the guys told him to cut it out. While we were hiking together, he kept probing me. "How old are you?" he'd ask. 19, almost 20, I'd reply. Don't lie. You must be 14 or something. You're so innocent. Young, innocent girls are always the cutest. He kept asking innocent enough questions, like where I lived, if I had siblings, what my favorite color was, but he then started asking me if I'd ever heard of BDSM. I was taken aback by this and was more than a little uncomfortable, so I'd pretend to not know what he was talking about, all the while trying to give as many cues as possible for him to drop the subject. But he then started going on about what BDSM was, about tying girls up, about hitting them and burning them. At this point, I was freaking out a little bit, but keeping my cool. I didn't want to show him my distress, any chinks in my armor, because I knew he'd probably get off on making me squirm. The only thought I had was, what the fuck? Seriously, what the fuck? Then, he started complimenting my skin. "You don't see a lot of girls with pale skin. Do you use moisturizer?" he'd ask, attempting to touch my hand, but I kept my arms close to me, held fast to my backpack. I was incredibly tense, and every muscle in my body was screaming. I sorely regretted wearing a tank top, as I could feel his eyes on me. He started telling me how pale skin is beautiful, since you can see the rope burns and the bruises better. The way he said it sent chills down my spine, and the anxious knots forming in my stomach grew tighter. He asked if I was a virgin. Then he asked me if I fantasized about rape, and if I'd like to try out rape play. Wide-eyed in disbelief, I turned my gaze away from the dirt path and looked at him. He was smiling. A creepy, childish sort of smile that was just chilling. I kept silent and quickened my pace. He felt too close, far too close. I wanted to run. He could probably see the fear in me at this point. There was no hiding it. But then, I saw that another pair of scouts were ahead of us. I ran to them, telling them that the four of us should group up and go together. At first they declined, saying that we're supposed to be going in groups of 2, but upon seeing how panicked and distressed I was, the 2 guys changed their minds, looking confusedly at Danny, who was silently glaring at them. I was just glad that someone else other than Danny was there. The 4 of us went up the mountain, and I tried to keep close to the other 2 boys and as far away from Danny as possible. Upon reaching the end of the trail and regrouping with the others, the 2 Boy Scouts offered to switch partners to descend the mountain path. Danny looked downright upset, angry even. He was looking at me as if he were betrayed, but I didn't care if it pissed him off. I accepted the offer of switching partners and was able to get back to camp in relative peace. On the way down, the Boy Scout I was with asked me if Danny was bothering me or something. I lied and said he wasn't bothering me too much. After all, I was 19. I thought it would be pathetic to get so distressed about some weird 15-year-old kid. I figured that so long as I stuck with the other guys, I'd be fine. But then, that night, I was alone in my tent. Everyone else got to sleep in pairs of 2 or 3, but since I was the only girl, I had to be alone in my tent. It's always a little creepy being alone and isolated in the forest, away from everyone else. The scoutmasters insisted my tent be far away from the boys' tents so that they wouldn't bother me, but it only put me in a more vulnerable, isolated position. I sorely wished I'd been closer to the protection of the rest of the group. Late at night, I heard rustling outside. I figured it was just a deer or an elk or something, as it usually was, and went back to sleep. But then I heard my tent opening. Opening my eyes, I peeked through the crack in my sleeping bag to see what it was, and there, I saw the white of an eye looking back at me, looking through the opening of my small tent. It was Danny, staring at me. I froze, holding my breath. I held my dad's hunting knife close to me, hiding in my sleeping bag, not moving a muscle, staring Danny down, pretending to be asleep, ready to fight at any moment should he take one step into my tent. But he didn't do anything. He just stared, watching me, breathing heavily and muttering incoherently to himself. "Are you there?" I thought I could hear him say. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, he left. The next morning, exhausted, I caught naps when, and if I could, and kept close to the other scouts in my group. It was difficult to maintain my calm and cool composure. The scout leaders were a little frustrated with me, since it seemed like I wasn't paying much attention to their instructions. But at this point, I didn't care much for it. I was always on some level of alert, as Danny would sometimes creep up behind me and caress my neck, or play with and try to smell my hair. And every night, Danny was there, watching. One night, he went digging through my backpack, looking for something. Unfortunately for him, I kept all my clothes and personals tucked away with me in my sleeping bag. He left with nothing. I grew up in rough situations and circumstances, so I always felt I can only rely on myself. Asking for help was never an option as a kid. Asking for help meant you're weak, so it hardly even occurred to me. I was prepared to tough out the rest of the week, but a little over halfway through the week, Danny was called away by the scoutmasters and sent home. I got the feeling that the Boy Scout that helped me before saw what he was doing and sent in a complaint about him to the staff. While everyone else was confused and happily saying bye, he just crossed his arms firmly and stared as Danny left. Danny looked so bewildered and confused by it all, like he didn't understand what he did to deserve being kicked out of camp. It was so strange. I tried my best to forget about it, and the rest of the week went off without a hitch. But the more I think back on it, the more I realize how damn freaky and bizarre that kid really was. I fear he may end up being some kind of serial rapist or something when he grows up. All I know for certain is that he was very disturbed. I'm just glad my dad told me to take his hunting knife in with me, even though knives weren't allowed at this camp. My father insisted I keep it for protection, and I don't regret it.
This happened to me a few months ago. I was at the store with my mom. She had to return some things. I can't remember what or why. I was a few feet away from her, looking at the books they had on clearance. A man, who could not have been much older than 50, also began looking at the books on the shelf next to me. Ironically, I'm a really paranoid person, but I didn't worry too much because my mom, and about 20 other people, were only a few feet away from me. I picked up one of the books. I think it was The Maze Runner, but I'm not too sure. And the man proceeded to pluck the book out of my hand. Then he asked me, "Are you buying this for college? Do you go to the university in town?" I told him no, and tried not to look at him. I figured he'd get bored and walk away, but he didn't. Every book I picked up, he picked up. I even tried to walk to the other side of the shelves, but he followed me. I dropped all my books and walked over to the customer service station where my mom was. I told her about him. but she told me to knock it off, that I was just being paranoid. I finally let it go when I saw him walk off toward the clothing sections. While we waited, my mom asked if I could go grab a bottle of aspirin. By now, I figured the guy must have left and went over to the medicine aisle. I walked over to the little 20 items or less register. There was a woman in front of me. Someone had walked up behind me, but I was just trying to focus on buying the aspirin and going back to the service station with my mom. The person behind me began to whistle, so I turned around, and it was the guy from the book aisle. I tried to keep my cool, but my body began to shake, and I broke out into a cold sweat. I kept looking back at him, and he kept smiling at me. The woman in front of me seemed more nervous than I was. She kept looking at him, and then to me. She was finally done checking out, and I started to scoot closer to the register. He also scooted closer, to the point he was almost completely pressed into me. I urged the cashier to hurry and just scan the bottle of aspirin. I snatched my change from her, grabbed my bag, and ran toward the customer service station. My mom was sitting on the bench, waiting for me, and I started crying my eyes out the moment I walked up to her. When I told her what happened, she became angry this time, and started walking towards the register I was at. But he had already left. In a hurry, the cashier told her. For a month, I refused to go into the store. I would opt to stay at home in fear that he would be there. Dear creepy man at the store, let's not meet again.
So I used to work in a public library. I absolutely loved my job and all the interesting people who came through. As with any job in public though, you do occasionally get some creeps. One night I was working a close with one other coworker, and this older gentleman comes in. He's probably pushing 60, skinny with stringy hair. He had come from one of our other locations, as we were open later than other branches, to use the computer. I set him up on one, and within minutes he was at the desk, asking to exchange the headphones he'd purchased earlier that day. I obliged without thinking anything of it. As I handed them to him, he grabbed my hand to introduce himself. He told me his name and told me how beautiful he thought I was, and that he'd love to take me out and show me a good time. Mind you, I'm 25 at the time. I politely declined, and he storms back to his computer till closing time, whereupon leaving, he mumbled some very choice words under his breath. The next day, I was working again, but setting up for a program in the conference room. One of my good friends who I work with came running in and told me some old dude came barreling through the library, mumbling about the girl with dark hair. She came to warn me, but luckily I was heading out for the night. She called me after I'd gotten home to inform me that some dude, turned out to be Creepface, called and asked if and when I was working again. At this point I was becoming legitimately concerned and contacted my supervisor about how to handle this. She told me to contact security and do what I felt best. The next day, I was at work and I was on edge constantly. I had my husband on standby and a good friend of mine who happened to be off that day to hang around the library for the last leg of my shift. And lo and behold, Creepface is making a beeline for me. I run to the back office, locked with a security code, to hide. He followed me the whole way, then waited outside the door, preventing me from coming back out front for almost an hour. The maintenance guy comes to the back to check on me, where I start hyperventilating when I heard someone touch the door. I told him the scenario and he told the dude off and never to come back. I had a friend and family follow me home for weeks to be safe, and I always took a different route home. One of the more terrifying experiences of my life. So creepy old dude, let's not meet again.
In 2008, I worked at a retail clothing store with my girlfriend Chelsea. We were both 18 years old, and we tried to work as many shifts together as possible to maximize our time together because she was still in school. My grandfather had recently purchased a Dodge Sprinter van for his business, and my car was being serviced overnight, so I got to drive the van. Chelsea and I loved the nights that we got to take the van, because it usually had back seats installed, and the tinted windows meant that we could have some privacy, which is great for teens who still live at home. That night, we only had one row of seats in the back, and it was the row just behind the driver and passenger. Chelsea and I parked near each other, like we always did, and worked our evening shift, closing the store with a few of our coworkers. We all leave together, and I help the manager lock up because the glass doors need to be aligned properly for the lock to engage. It's early March in Pennsylvania, and it's still very cold outside. So Chelsea usually starts her car to warm it up, and then sits with me as my car warms up. When I get to the vehicles, her car is idling because she is already in the van. I don't even realize that I still have my keys, and I never unlock the doors. She sits with me chatting for a while. She sits on my lap, and we kiss in the front seats, and we decide it's too late and too cold to have a little fun in the back. Every night, we drive home separately from work while talking on the phone. She usually gets home first, and I stay on the line while she walks up her long driveway in the dark. That night, I made it home first for some reason, and I knew I had a lot of stuff to carry in, so when I'm close to home, I tell her I'll call her in a little bit. She asked me to stay on the line because she's almost home, and she doesn't like walking past the dark bushes next to her driveway. I stay on the phone and fumble with all of my things that I'm carrying out of the van. I know I locked and armed the van because I was using a key fob to lock the vehicle. I dropped a few things while struggling to keep the phone to my ear. The motion lights have illuminated the whole area, so I'm able to see everything that I dropped. We both make it inside safely, and then we also decide not to stay on the phone because she had school in the morning. I began to doze off immediately in my bedroom. I lived with my grandparents who built a house to accommodate my grandfather's aging parents suffering from Alzheimer's, my great-grandparents, so they didn't have to go in a home. The driveway runs parallel to a daylight basement that has two garage doors, an entrance door, and the French doors to my bedroom. I'm falling asleep as all of the motion lights finally turn off, and now my room is completely dark. It wasn't 20 minutes later when I'm jarred awake by the alarm sirens of the van. All the motion lights are on, and the flashing lights of the van alarm are filling my room. I left the key fob upstairs in the main part of the house, so I ran upstairs to silence the alarm. In the kitchen, as I'm grabbing the fob, my grandfather in his boxers, my great-grandmother in her nightgown, and I in my boxer briefs all meet in the dark. My grandfather grunts as he sees me grabbing the key fob, but what my granny said sent shivers down my spine. "What in the Sam Hill are you doing running outside at this time of night, darling?" I wasn't outside. I explained that I was sleeping, and she insisted that I was outside making the van alarm. My great-grandparents' bedrooms sits above the garage doors looking down and over the driveway and the van. I'm assuming she's confused. She has Alzheimer's after all. The goosebumps from her exclamation prompted me to grab a knife from the butcher's block, and my grandfather followed with a baseball bat. We both walk outside wearily, in our boxers, in the cold, but highly illuminated and loud dead of night. The van is still going crazy. The interior lights are all flashing, and I remember that specifically because I'd never seen a car alarm do that. We silence the alarm and start looking around. My grandfather says he thinks a deer may have ran out of the woods in the dark and hit the van. I don't say anything as we investigate. When I reach the back of the van, I notice the door is wide open. That explains the alarm. The van has a feature that if the vehicle alarm is armed and the door is open somehow from the inside or outside, it alarms. But how? I locked it and armed it, hence the blaring alarm, but that's when I realized the door was open from the inside. My blood ran cold. The door is open, so the inside lights are still on. I see the empty space behind the row of seats, and there are wadded up napkins and a chip bag. They weren't ours. Someone was in the van with me the entire time. I must have left the van unlocked by mistake when I went into work, and that's how Chelsea was able to get into the van without keys at the end of the night. Was it a homeless person escaping the cold, or someone with more sinister intent? What if I hadn't gotten off the phone like I wanted to? If they had ill intent, the fact that I was on my phone might have saved my life, because Chelsea would have raised hell if she had heard me being attacked. I get chills every time I think about it. We didn't call the police because my grandfather was skeptical of my conclusion, but my gut tells me that I didn't drive home alone that night. Person in the back of my van, let's not meet.
Just the other night, there was a windstorm that blew through my town. The wind was accompanied by a downpour of rain. Having grown up on the coast of Oregon, I'd fallen in love with the sound of rain, especially when it's hitting the cement patio outside my bedroom window. So I had my window open, so I could hear the rain better, and settled into bed, curling up in my blankets and trying to fall asleep. Not long after settling in, I heard what sounded like nails, or claws, scratching at the cement. This wasn't entirely out of place, seeing as I have 2 wolf hybrids who usually sleep out back at night, so I brushed it off and tried to drift off again. Not much later, I hear it again. I opened my eyes and focused on the sound. The more I listened, the more it became obvious that this wasn't Kova or Anya. If they were moving around, I would hear their tags jingling. I would hear the distinct pattern of them walking. But this was as if someone was taking their nails and scratching at the cement. Being too lazy to get up and put pants on to check if the dogs were inside, I texted my stepdad and asked if he'd let the girls out or not. He told me no, that since the wind was blowing so hard and there was so much rain, he brought them inside about an hour ago. I told him about the sound I was hearing, so he got up and grabbed a flashlight. I heard him walk by my bedroom door and open the back door directly outside my window. He came back in and told me he didn't see anything, but if I heard it again to just look outside. So he went back to bed, and I stayed there, listening. It was quiet for a bit, so I figured maybe I was just hearing leaves sliding across the ground. I had finally begun to fall asleep when I heard a hard thud on the outside of my bedroom wall. It startled me and I got up, peeking out of the window to see what the hell it was. There was no way it could have been a raccoon, because since we got our dogs, they haven't bothered coming into our yard. I see something small and black bolt across the yard. That was honestly the last thing I expected to see. I decided to just sit and listen. I wrapped myself up in my blanket and got my phone, texting my friend Justin to tell him about the sound. There's something outside my window, and it just ran into the side of the house. It didn't take long for him to reply, since he had just gotten off work. It's probably just a raccoon or something. No, they don't come to our yard anymore. Not since we got Kova. And it's too small to be a raccoon, unless it's a baby. Well, if you're unsettled by it, I can stay up and talk with you if you want. Yeah, I'd like that. For the next half hour, I was hearing fast skittering, tapping, thumping, and hissing coming from outside my window, until it stopped suddenly. I thought that would be the end of it, until I heard what sounded like claws scraping the wall. Pressing my ear to the wall, it sounded as if something was slowly crawling up the side of the house. Justin! Shit, it sounds like it's climbing up the wall. Dude, it's under my window. What the fuck is this thing? Shit, that's creepy. just try to relax. Thanks, man. Real helpful. Continuing to listen, the sound stopped and I was thinking I was just tripping myself out, until I heard a soft tap, tap, tap on the glass. By this point, I'm freaking the fuck out. Justin, it's tapping on my window. It's tapping my goddamn window. Of course. Now of all times, he doesn't answer, and I yell for my stepdad, who is snoring like a bear in the other room. But almost as soon as I yell for him, my 2 dogs come bolting into my room, barking and growling. As soon as the dogs came in barking, I heard whatever it is hiss and scrape down my wall, before I heard the grass in the yard being disturbed. I was sitting in my bed, freaking out as Cobra and Anya lay beside my bed and stare at the window. After a few minutes, I get a text from Justin. Shit, my roommates needed help with something. Is everything okay? I told him yes, that the dogs had scared it off, and I was going to go on my laptop to distract myself. He ended up calling and talking to me until I fell asleep. There's no way it was just an animal. If it was, the dogs would not have reacted the way they did. I've encountered a lot of things, but never at my own home. I really hope that it never happens again.
When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a reputation for crime/danger. However, the neighborhood I lived in was usually considered one of the good neighborhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome, built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls. Anyway, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition, and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things and make promises to get the place fixed up a bit, but never really did. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor, my front door immediately on the left as you walked into the building's door on the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area with one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs, was huge and heavy and was never locked. In fact, you couldn't lock it. So, basically the door to my apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night I was getting home from work and it was very late, about 3:45 a.m. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was really open late at night, and I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV before I went to bed. I had also gotten totally naked, something I truly loved being able to do, considering I lived alone. Anyway, not 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I hear 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building's front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put a robe on and slowly crept toward the door, which, by the way, was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I kinda had to take a leap of faith and open the door. When I did, a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man stood staring me down with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing he said was,
"Can I come in?"
With the door barely open, I had a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, "What's up?" He just kind of stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said,
"I've seen you around,"
and started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous.
"Yeah, I've been watching you, and I like the way you look,"
he said.
"So, you gay? Bisexual?"
I was just like, "I don't know, but it's late and I'm going to bed. Bye." He kinda nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hand still on the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear something if it happened. Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't about until a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment, winding down by myself after I had some friends over drinking and smoking a little bit, as college kids will do. All of a sudden, I hear a weird rattling noise coming from across the room, so I turned off the music I was playing to find out what it was, coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Like a deer in headlights, I was frozen, staring at the things wiggle and shake until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and soared to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock and forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped for a second because whoever it was clearly knew now that I knew. It was only a second, though, before they just started struggling again, and I had to use all my might to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my ribcage, and after about 15 seconds of wrestling with the intruder, it suddenly stopped, and I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps run down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralyzed with my hands at the door for a good while before I realized I was crying and shaking and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police, but in hindsight, I regret doing this for the following reasons. I was having basically a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911, and I actually threw up during the call, and I think that's when they decided I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened as I'm shaking and crying. I noticed at one point that they're both smirking and laughing, and I say, What's funny right now?" One of them goes,
"It reeks of marijuana."
I was just like, okay, and basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they said they weren't going to charge me with anything, just take my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides keep your door locked. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep the last part short. Basically, this same scenario happened one more time about 2 weeks from the last time. Only instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour, 2-hour drive from his house to this place, with a crowbar up his sleeve. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten there, whoever it was had already left. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and a peephole on my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time, and I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminum baseball bat to protect myself, so I felt a lot better from then now on. Needless to say though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks and if it was that guy who had come to my door the first time, but whoever it was, let's not meet.
Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, she suggested that we meet up in person. She invited me to this cafe shop. I accepted. However, the day of, she started messaging me saying she had to tell me something. Her pictures on her Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to still meet up with him. Naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile and continued on with my life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun, and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. She asked me if I wanted to meet up. I said sure, as long as it was in a public place. We decided on a cafe. The next day, I sat at a table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed, and she was nowhere to be found. I then peered out the window and saw from across the street a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds, and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At that point, I left the cafe, got on my bike. I always bike everywhere I go, and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together, and a reason that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile, and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out. After about a day, I stopped picking up any calls unless it displayed the caller's name. I then started receiving texts. At first they were pretty harmless calls for attention and begging me to meet up in person. It then changed to very sexual texts until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out my family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying he/she would get them involved unless I answered. Because they were texting me, I could see the displayed number. But when I called phone providers, they told me the number couldn't be traced. It was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks not responding to texts, thinking I shouldn't feed the troll, but eventually it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 calls and texts a day. I would wake up to 10-20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The texting and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they gave out numbers at users' requests. They said their policy stated that they wouldn't/couldn't unless a valid identification was provided. Then one day, I tried logging into Facebook, but was denied. Within a day, friends started contacting me asking me what the hell I was doing, saying they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation. They helped me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on for a month now. Documented everything, but told me since I or any of my friends/relatives were in no immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker. I decided against it, however, just hoped it would fade out. I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated, ignored any text/phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends would receive an occasional text as well, which weirded us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it. One day I came home and things felt very eerie. Door unlocked, windows open, no one home. A strong breeze running through the apartment. I did a check of the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. Been almost 7 months now. The text/calls have more or less stopped. I get an occasional text, but at most every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social/personal life. I became more weary of people around me and my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was very difficult though. I tried to maintain my composure as best as I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps/websites. Things are getting back to normal. At this point, I just wanted to put all this behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should ever use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first, Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Weird Tinder stalker, let's not meet.
This took place about 3, maybe 4 years ago. It was a calm winter evening, and my parents were gone for a couple of days on Christmas Eve to relax after a very tiring last day at work. It was just me, my video games, and my dog, Chase. I'm a 14-year-old male, 6'1" at the time, so I was a pretty big dude for my age. I had taken up MMA, and I had also started going to the gym for a couple of years by that time, so I could take care of myself if needed to. Now, back to the story. I was home alone, playing some Battlefield on my PS3, all chores taken care of. My dog is fed and lying next to me. I did my usual routine as every other night. Played some PS3 until about 12:30 a.m. Wash my teeth, mess around on my phone for a bit, and then go to sleep. It was about 1:20 a.m. I was on my phone when I heard something. Like faint footsteps going around my backyard, onto the left side of the house, where the bathroom window is. It's basically like this. To give an insight of how my house is from the inside, there are 2 floors. The first is where the kitchen, living room, and bathroom are. There's a staircase to the left of the bathroom door, which goes upstairs to the bedroom. My room is the first door to the right, as soon as you walk up the stairs. My parents' room is a few steps to the left. Chase is a very protective dog, so when he hears anything, he stands up and bolts it downstairs to the front door. Only now, he just stood up and went to the start of the staircase, just staring down onto the bathroom door. As soon as I exited my bedroom to check out what was going on, I heard what sounded like the bathroom window shuffling. I froze. Slowly, I made my way into my bedroom, calling Chase behind me with a hand gesture. I turned off the lights in my room, as they were the only ones on in the house, and I made my way to the staircase again. I don't know why I did that. Dumb move, I know, but I did. So yeah. I crouch walked down the stairs, and on the second to last step, the bathroom window opened, with a slight thump as it hit the top of its frame. Right then and there, fight or flight kicked in. If I made a run for it, there was a very high chance he would see me, and I didn't know if he had a gun on him, so I stood there, unarmed, with my only options being whatever I had learned over the course of 5 years of MMA and my dog. I waited for what seemed like a minute, which in real life couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, and then I see him. Black hood on, black skinny jeans, black all-stars, and long, greasy blonde hair. He hadn't seen me yet, but if he turned around, me and Chase were ready for a fight. He turned around, and as soon as his eyes met mine, my fist had already connected with his bottom jaw. I hit him hard enough to hit his head against the wall. He then proceeded to lose consciousness with Chase growling on top of him. After that, I called my mom, and then the cops. The police showed up in 10, maybe 15 minutes, and they arrested the dude. My parents arrived the next day, never to leave me home alone again.
A couple of years ago, I was working front desk at a hotel in a small town off the interstate in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure how other hotels do it, but unless it was a busy summer, front desk agents worked alone on every shift. Since it was second shift, that meant that all the housekeepers had left hours ago. My manager was gone for the day, the maintenance man was gone, and I was the only person in this 3-story hotel, with the exception of about 4 rooms that were being rented. Since it was about 7 at night, I'm pretty sure all but one of the guests were out to dinner. Even as a woman, it never really bothered me to work by myself at night. I was cautious, but never creeped out too badly. I mostly spent the long, boring hours either catching up on homework or watching Jeopardy on the lobby TV. but I'm not sure what I was doing when he walked in. The sun had already set, but it was still light out. He came through the front doors and walked over to the desk. I couldn't see his car anywhere, which was odd since usually check-ins parked under the overhang to unload luggage. I didn't think much of it and asked him how he was doing. He was maybe 5'8", medium build, dark hair, glasses, looked like a normal 20-something kid. He said he wanted to know if I could help him, and proceeded to go into a very heartfelt story about how he had been to other hotels off this exit, and they all turned him down. He said his sister ran away from home a while ago and that he came all the way to California to pick her up from, I think, New Jersey? Being that he wasn't from California, it was starting to be gross winter weather here. I laughed a little and said, "Yeah, sorry it's so awful here." He paused. He stared at me completely stone-faced, as if I had just made a joke at his expense. "What do you mean?" "Just the weather," I tried to recover. I was used to making worthless small talk and jokey observations with guests, but nobody had ever taken anything I said casually or so seriously. "It's not exactly California weather outside." "I love it here. I think it's beautiful," he said, and again stared. I didn't know what to say. Think about it. What would you say to that? I tried to laugh it off and said I'd trade him, but he just stared. Finally he goes, "Anyway, the reason I'm here is that I've been driving almost non-stop for a couple days and I've honestly got almost no money to me." Here it comes. I thought some guy is gonna ask me for a room at a crazy low rate because he sees the parking lot is almost empty. Before I can say anything, he continues, "I don't want a room. I just need a place to take a shower really quick. I swear I won't touch anything or mess anything up. I honestly just need a shower really badly." I thought about it for a minute. At the time, I hated my manager. I knew she'd never allow it. And for whatever reason, nothing in my brain screamed stranger dangers, so I finally agreed. He told me he could give me his driver's license to hold on to until he was done, but I trusted him. He ran out to his car to get some clothes, and I gave him a handful of tiny soaps and shampoos, and some towels so he didn't fuck up the ones the maids put in the room this morning. I put him in a room right down the hall from the front desk so that I could keep an eye on him. He went in, and I went back to watching YouTube videos. A couple minutes later, he comes down to the desk. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't figure out how to turn the shower on. Could you come show me?" I'm sure you're thinking exactly what I was thinking when I looked back on this situation, but no, I didn't see why this was a dangerous situation at the time. A young woman, alone in a hotel room with a stranger who hasn't left any kind of trail or identification, with no other employees on property, and almost no other guests. Yeah, I'm stupid. I got up and switched the phone lines from switchboard to cordless and took the receiver with me into the back. I grabbed the keys and locked up the front desk area before following him down the hallway to his room. I had easily 50 pounds on him and about 2 inches height, so I felt secure. I opened the door and walked in while he followed behind me. I heard the door click and realized immediately that I wanted to leave. I walked to the bathtub, turned on the water, easiest to understand tabs by the way, and ran my hand under the stream a few times. "Just pull up that when you're ready," I said, and scurried to the door. I could hear him saying something behind me, but I opened the door and walked out. I got back to the front desk, locked the door behind me, and sat down. At this point, I was a little shaken at what just happened, but talked myself down by reminding myself that if he was going to rape me, murder me, he would have done so by now. Again, dumb. Finally, he comes down the hallway and hands me the towels and empty bottles of shampoo, body wash. He says he's hungry, so I point to the breakfast area in the lobby and tell him there's some apples and bananas sitting out from breakfast and that he could take some for the road. I remember hinting that I wanted him to leave. He walks a few yards over to the counter and grabs a banana and an apple, then comes back to the front desk. "What did you say your name was again?" Queenie Frostine," I said hesitantly. He could see my name tag. How old are you? 23. Could I ask you a question, Queen Frostine? He seemed so confident, almost robotic, like this was Groundhog Day, and he has relived this uncomfortable, awkward half hour 50 times before, and has no reason to think anything is weird or spooky or inappropriate. I was standing now, and I moved a little farther from the desk, casually putting my back against the wall and adding another foot or so of space between us. Do you have a boyfriend, Queen Frostine? I said I did. He asked me, really? I wasn't lying, but perhaps he thought I was. I wondered. I assured him I did, and he gave me an odd look. The best way to describe it is that he saw something funny in his head and was amused by it, but more amused by the fact that he was the only person who could see it. That's really weird, he continued. Why is that? I asked. He told me it was weird again, and I racked my brain trying to think of what he meant. Was he implying that I am ugly? Did he think I was a lesbian? Any and all solutions came flooding over me so fast, yet none of them fit. Why is that so weird? It just is, he smiled a little. Okay, I let out. I stood there staring at the floor a little bit, then back at him. Anyway, I gotta go. Thanks for the shower and the fruit, he said as he walked out the door. I watched his car pull away, but couldn't tell what kind it was. It was that weird kind of time in the early winter where it goes from dusk to pitch black in what feels like 10 minutes. I sat back down, rattled. I couldn't believe how uncomfortable I was all of a sudden. My stomach burned inside and I was relieved that he was gone. For the first time, I felt really truly scared in that hotel by myself. I got up and ran to the laundry room that connects to the front desk. I made sure the door leading to the lobby on the side was locked. It was. I ran to the other side of the laundry room and skidded into the door that leads out to the public hallways. I checked to make sure that it was locked. It wasn't. I usually didn't lock it on the off chance that I'd go to the bathroom and forget my keys some night. I slammed it shut and latched it. The phone rang. I walked over to pick up the cordless that I laid next to the switchboard. Thank you for calling. This is all the further I got. Hey, Queen Frostine. I paused for a second, shocked that someone messed up my spiel. It definitely wasn't my boyfriend's voice, nor was it maintenance man. It's Adam. I was just there. I could literally feel my heart sink. I looked at the door but couldn't see him there. The darkness on the outside unsettled me. I sneaked behind the door to the front desk and into the laundry room. I didn't know if he was outside watching me, but I didn't want to be seen. I mumbled and, "Oh, hey," trying to be casual and failing. He continued, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know why I said it was weird that you had a boyfriend." I peeked out again to see if it was him at the door yet, but nobody was there. I think it's weird that you have a boyfriend, but you still let a guy come in and shower. I could feel my pulse quicken. I mean, that's so weird. Is it? I asked, trying to keep my composure as I ran through the laundry room and rechecked the doors. Then I remembered the only door that wouldn't lock. The door directly to the outside. The back of the hotel where employees would sneak out to smoke weed. The latch had been broken for a while, and our manager decided that decorating the lobby for Thanksgiving came before safety issues in terms of budget. I stepped back to the doorway that led to the front desk and to the laundry room and locked that one behind me. "Yeah," he continued. "I mean, you have a boyfriend and you still let me come in and shower. I don't know. Don't you think that's weird?" "No," I said, trying to end the conversation in a short tone. "That's all I wanted to say. Anyway, I'll see you soon, Queen Frostine," he finished almost threateningly. I hung up the phone. I called my sister and told her to send her husband over, but she insisted on calling the police. I made her promise not to, as I didn't want to lose my job. I called the maintenance man, since I knew he lived right up the road, and told him to hurry over. I called my boyfriend and told him to please come. I wanted my bases covered so that someone would show up within 10 or 15 minutes. I never heard from him again, and we all kept it a secret from my manager to keep me from getting fired. I hadn't thought about this for a while, but looking back at it, it's entirely creepy to me. So, yeah, Adam, let's not meet again.
About 3 years ago, I moved into my first apartment. I lived alone on the first floor of a 3-story shotgun house built in the mid-1800s. The house was beautiful, albeit a little creepy due to its age. It was on the nicer end of a rough neighborhood near the university I was attending at the time, and break-ins were pretty common. But I always felt safe because my landlord and his wife lived in the 2 floors right above me. They were in their late 60s, but it felt good to know that I wasn't totally alone. It was the first fall I was living there, and the days were getting shorter. On this particular evening, it was already good and dark outside by 6 p.m. I was in the kitchen making dinner when suddenly the power cut out. I was a little startled, but luckily the flame from the gas range was still going, so I could see well enough to grab my phone to use as a flashlight. Aside from the flame flickering under the pot of soup, the house was pitch dark. I double-checked the light switch in the kitchen, but got nothing. The only thought that occurred to me was that it was a strange time for the power to go out. It wasn't storming, and it wasn't particularly hot outside or anything. I used the light from my phone to navigate from the kitchen towards the front of the house. I peeked out the blinds in the living room, but couldn't see from that vantage point whether any of the other houses had lights on. I decided it would be a good time to call the landlord, because I sure as hell wasn't going down to our creepy stone basement to mess with the 100-year-old fuse box. I knew they were home since I kept hearing them go up and down the stairs earlier, so I rang them up. Being older folks, they only had a house phone, and when I called it, it was disconnected. Of course, it was connected to the power. Still standing there in the pitch darkness, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I remembered the burner I left on and was heading back toward the kitchen when I heard their front door slam shut and heavy footsteps in the entryway that separated our apartments. Then I heard 2 men's muffled voices. You know that primal fear people talk about when something bad is about to happen to them? I felt it. Every hair on my body stood up. In half an instant, my heart was in my throat. I stood paralyzed in the doorway to the kitchen. Luckily, I snapped myself out of it and grabbed the closest weapon I could find, a bright pink chef's knife on the kitchen counter. I'm a small woman, and certainly not strong. I had my doubts about whether I could fend off 1 intruder, but 2? I crept as quietly as possible back toward the front door, clutching the knife in one hand and my phone in the other. I stood a couple feet from the door, and the men were still out in the entryway talking. Their voices were rough sounding, and definitely not from the area. Well, do what you gotta do. I'll be waiting in the van, said one. With that, I heard the front door open and close. At this point, my heart was beating out of my chest, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Were they just breaking in, or did they intend to hurt me? Had they already hurt the landlord and his wife? Shit. I made my way over to the blinds and peeked out the window again. Sure enough, I saw a man in dark clothes hop into a white van parked across the street, just to the left. I live at the end of a dead-end street, where you can only park facing one direction, and the van was facing the wrong way, ready to head up the street. I tried to collect myself. There was nowhere to hide, really. Perhaps I stood a chance that this guy wasn't expecting me to be ready when he came in. Unfortunately, my cat hates strangers, and she was now going crazy, tearing back and forth through the house at full speed while meowing. In my head, I silently cursed her for giving our position away and probably killing us. Then suddenly, I heard the landlord's apartment door open and close again, and the man went back upstairs. A million thoughts raced through my head. My car was parked just up the street. If I sprinted, I could make it and drive somewhere safe. I don't know why I didn't just call the police. I think I was afraid the men would hear my voice and know where I was. In any case, I had my hand on the doorknob, psyching myself up to run. I couldn't hear the man moving around anymore, which probably meant he was on the 3rd floor. His buddy was still waiting in the van, lights off. I peeked one last time to make sure no one was waiting near the front stoop before I ripped the door open and ran full tilt out the front door and up the sidewalk about 100 feet to my car. I hopped in and locked the doors when suddenly my phone started vibrating in my hand. It startled me so badly, I almost chucked it across the car. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up. "Hello?" I managed to choke out. It was my landlord, sounding as calm as ever. I said something along the lines of, "Are you okay?" and was about to tell him not to go in the house. I was so scared and out of breath that it came out more like, "Don't, men, house." He seemed confused, and before I could collect my words, he started telling me that, yes, they were fine and the power was out on the whole street apparently. He just phoned the energy company on his new cell phone to check on it. I should probably take down the number while he's got me on the line, and he hoped I didn't mind, but some repairmen were at the house to check on the heating and cooling system. They might need access through my apartment to get to the basement. Shame they came by right before the power outage. Slowly, the dust began to settle in my mind. I had been at the point of maybe having a heart attack and definitely wetting myself over some repairmen, one of whom was still waiting outside in the van and had just seen me haul ass up the street with a giant pink knife in my hand. I was too embarrassed to walk back to the apartment, so I just told the landlord to go ahead and let them in if he needed to. I'd be surprised if that repairman didn't call the police himself to report a crazy woman with a knife running through the streets. On the bright side, I learned I can run quite fast if I need to.
Some information about me is that I am 15 and was at the time of the encounter. I am male. My height is around 185 centimeters and my weight around 75 kilograms. It was this summer that this encounter happened. I was on vacation to my old home from my childhood in Portland. It was a fairly large home with a huge backyard surrounded by a fence. Behind that was a forest. The only problem with this house is within 1 kilometer, there is only one other home and it is empty. A girl with her parents lived there. I had a crush on her when I still used to live there, but they very rarely visit that house anymore as they live in Germany and go there in the winter. I am 15 at the moment of writing this. I was alone at the house for 2 weeks as my grandfather had to watch over a hotel, and I was used to being alone, traveling across the cities in Portland. I felt kind of lonely at this point, because my German Shepherd passed away 2 years ago, and no one I knew lived within 1 hour of walking time from there. I spent most of my time on my laptop. However, I would occasionally go into the woods and explore, because I used to go there with my grandfather to collect mushrooms. I even went to the woods 3 times that night to watch the wildlife in the forest, as it was very peaceful. It was 5 days before my grandfather would come back. It was 1 a.m., and I was watching television downstairs when I felt like I was hearing something that wasn't in the television. However, every time I turned the volume down, I could hear nothing, so I just thought I was imagining things, as I often thought someone called my name when I wore a headset. After a bit, I just decided to go to bed, and when I suddenly turned off the television, I heard sound of footsteps for a second before they stopped. I was sure this time I wasn't imagining, and quickly got up from the sofa and headed upstairs, going into my room and locking the door behind me. I was completely quiet and tried to listen if there was any more footsteps, but I didn't hear anything since then. I walked over to the window from where I could see the whole backyard, and as I pulled the curtain, I could see someone standing in a backyard. There was no light to the backyard, so I could barely see him. I pulled out my phone while staring at the figure, quietly calling the police. However, as I started to speak to my phone, I could see the figure quickly rush to the side of the building. Soon after that, I could hear glass break downstairs. I quickly threw my phone on the bed after I told the police where I lived and dragged the desk over to the door of my room. I moved back from the door and grabbed my butterfly knife. I remember how much I was shaking at the time, the knife almost falling out of my hands. I heard footsteps on the lower floor of the house for a few minutes before I heard him going up the stairs. However, whoever that was stopped right before my door and started banging on the door more and more violently. I stayed quiet in the room with my knife still in my hand. Then I heard him speak. "I know you're in there, open up!" I was afraid to do anything, I just stood there, completely frozen from fear. After a bit, I heard the sirens of police and heard the man rush down the stairs and through my backyard, climbing over the fence and disappearing into the woods. I told the police about the whole incident and noticed that the broken window was the only thing destroyed in the house. There was nothing missing from the house. Nothing was even touched except for the window. The police have not found that man that came into my house, and I left Portland early, and I don't think I want to visit that house again.
In 2007, I was 20 years old and lived with my girlfriend. Neither of us had a vehicle at the time, so when we got into an argument one night, I left and started walking the 8 miles to my mum's house to give things a chance to settle down. This was around 1 AM. As I'm walking, a small goldish car pulls up beside me, and the driver, a middle-aged black man with a slight speech impediment, asks me if I need a ride, which I declined. He asked me if I was sure several times, and I said yes, but thanked him, and he drove off. For the next couple of miles, he was idling at every major intersection, sometimes honking his horn at me slightly. Every time I noticed him, I made a conscious effort not to look at him again, or invite any more of his attention. I thought he had got tired of messing with me, until I walked in front of a small used car dealership. I heard someone say, "Hey, come here," from the parking lot. It was him again. I stopped, obviously startled, and he tries to calm me down. "Whoa, chill, dog. Hey man, you sure you don't need a ride? I'm not busy at all, and I really don't mind." I again declined, and he starts asking me questions left and right. I talked to him for a good 45 minutes or so, hoping it'd make him leave me alone before I go on a less busy street. He asked me what my name was several times, as if to check if I gave him a fake one. I did, but I lied consistently. He also kept asking me if I had any weapons on me, or if I was violent. I told him no, which was probably stupid. He then started trying to get me to step closer, so he didn't have to yell to talk to me. No. Finally, I tell him I need to keep walking. He again offers me a ride, is again rejected, and then says, "Look man, I'm really just trying to get some weed." What the fuck? Given his behaviour and the circumstances, that seemed very unlikely. I walked off and crossed the street and zigzagged through some shopping centres to lose him. If I did, it was only temporarily. At this point, I was confused, slightly freaked out, and mildly paranoid. But what happened next really freaked me out. An hour or so later, I was on a quiet street, almost to my mum's house. Psst! I look to my right, and I see a chubby but attractive Hispanic woman smiling really big and waving me in to approach her. She was in a driveway of a yard full of plants, a man-made jungle type thing. Can't see a lot of the yard from the street. She did not live there. Yeah? What's up? I asked her, not moving towards her at all. "Hey baby, wanna come home?" "No thanks," I told her. "Oh, you have a girlfriend?" "I just don't know you," I say, and then continue walking. I honestly thought at the time that this was a setup for a robbery or something, but it appeared she was alone, and there was no one else in the truck. I glanced back towards her, and she's now got her truck door open, like she's going to leave. But the back of her shorts are pulled down, with her ass fully exposed and staring up at the sky like a lunatic. "Are you alright?" I asked. I was genuinely concerned. "Yes, I'm just waiting for someone." Waiting for someone in the sky at 2:30 AM in a stranger's driveway, hidden from the view of a street? Okay, good luck, weirdo. She had to be on something. I kept walking. She backs out of her truck and drives past me. As she does, I see there was someone else in the truck the whole time. Must have been hiding for some reason. It was the black dude from earlier. Staring. Eyes like daggers. No smile, or anything this time. I get chills even now thinking about realizing, for the first time, that this guy really wanted me for something. And I probably almost became a victim of some major crime. Shortly thereafter, I made it to my mum's. 5 freaking years pass. It's 2012. I have a car, but decide to walk to Walmart for dog food. I'm in the same general area, with my iPad mini in my pocket and earbuds. I see a car pull up next to me in the parking lot. "Hey dog, do you know how to get to the Landmark Apartments?" I recognized him immediately, even after 5 years. He looks like a skinnier version of Fleece Johnson from MSNBC's Lockup. I am almost positive he didn't recognize me, or remember our previous encounter. I take out my iPad, connect to Wi-Fi, and try to look up this apartment complex. It did not exist. He volunteers that his name is Carlton. I start telling him where he might want to check, but he's not interested, and starts asking me questions. Again, asked my name several times, asked if I'm armed or violent, asked me to step closer so he doesn't have to yell. How often does this guy do this shit, for fuck's sake? "You going to Walmart? I can take you there." "No thanks, guy." He keeps trying to get me into the car and asking if I have weapons. Finally, I make it clear I'm not going near him. He starts to pull off and then stops immediately. "Look man, to be honest with you, I'm just trying to find some weed." Okay, no. Screw this. I jog to Walmart, send an MMS message to my girlfriend of his car and license plate in case I turned up dead somehow, and haven't seen him since. If he was doing this kind of thing for at least 5 years, he had to have been successful at some point. I personally hope that he was just gay and horny, but he gave off a serial killer vibe.
So, I'll start off by saying that this story is pretty long and is gonna make my friend and I sound like complete fucking idiots. This is because, well, we are. We completely ignored everything we've been told about stranger danger and basic safety because, hey, we are both 20-year-old college dudes. I also am not the best writer, so bear with me. This happened last Sunday. So, my parents are pretty well off and love to travel to exotic destinations. They planned a trip to St. Lucia and extended an invitation to my sister, her boyfriend, and my friend Vince and I. St. Lucia is a small mountainous island near the coast of Venezuela. It's a significantly underdeveloped nation with an all-cash economy where few taxes are collected and spent for the good of the commons. Violent crime on the island is not unheard of. There are a few paved roads, a few major favela-like towns, and a couple of small, secluded, high-end boat-accessible resorts. We stayed at one of these resorts, My parents were in one room, and the rest of us stayed in a room next door. The rooms were more like little huts open entirely to the outdoors with easy accessible rooftops above and below. All was well for most of the trip. We went hiking, snorkeling, and relaxed on the beach. As much as my friend and I enjoyed it, this resort was meant for honeymooners, not for college kids looking to have a wild time. One night, Vince and I were up drinking late at the bar, which was not extremely lively as usual, and we get to talking with the bartender, Gustavo. We bond with Gustavo over our interests in Easy Weezy and girls, and nothing seemed off at all. We asked him if he knew any clubs or where to go to have a good time in town. He told us about how we really had to leave the resort to experience St. Lucia as we expected. He offered to take us to his place sometime to show us the good time we'd been looking for. He then showed us a picture of his house. This should have been the first red flag, but we were drinking and had no reason not to trust our new friend. Gustavo had a massive house for St. Lucian standards, complete with a huge flat-screen TV, pool table, bar, and a Camaro. We'd been around the island a bit at this point and had not seen a house or car half as nice as his. We told him we'd be interested, but would have to let him know when we could go later. The next day, we get a text from Gustavo midday saying that a boat was at the dock to pick us up. This was strange to Vince and I since we didn't really agree upon a time. We told him that we had plans and couldn't go during the day anyway. This seemed to piss him off just a little bit. The next day, whenever Vince and I would see Gustavo at the resort, he lacked enthusiasm and ignored us as we said hello to him. The following day, however, Gustavo was off work and texting us like we were best friends again. He asked us if we could come to his place and told us he was making pizza, had girls lined up, and some of that good. Knowing that my parents would never let me do something so risky, we told him that we would go out after 10 because my parents were most likely going to be asleep at that point. He agreed, but was kind of annoyed and made it sound like we owed him and better not bail again. On a side note, I've never done coke, but my friend Vince has. I was slightly worried, but I figured I'd just say no, like Dare taught me or whatever, and still could have a good time. Besides, we couldn't really bail on him twice. As 10 o'clock rolled around, my parents had gone to sleep, my sister and her boyfriend had gone elsewhere, and Vincent and I had finished up pre-gaming at the bar near the dock until it closed for the night. It started getting very dark, and soon Vincent and I were about the only ones down at the dimly lit beach area. This is when things really started to get sketchy. Around 10:15, we get a call from Gustavo saying something along the lines of,
"The plans have changed. The boat taxi is no longer being arranged through the resort. My guy is coming to pick you guys up. The fare is going to be a little more expensive now, around $100 plus tip. He's nice, but he has a little temper, and he's in a hurry, so don't piss him off. Look for the green and yellow boat and just get in."
The unfamiliar flat and low tone of his voice that he used sent chills down my spine, and suddenly we knew we were in serious trouble. We only had $140 on us together and immediately agreed that we would wait for the boat, give him the cash, and say we couldn't go anymore. A few minutes later, we got another call saying,
"My guy is going to be a little late. He has some drop-offs to make, but if you're not gonna dock when he gets there, he will be knocking on room 17. Don't make him knock."
Room 17 is the room my parents are staying in. Vincent is about to throw up at this point. Trying to calm down, I suggest that we hide our phones and wallets nearby just in case they try to mug us. There was nobody but us at the beach at this point. I could barely make out some small boats far out in the bay, but they hadn't moved in a while. We were standing on a small rock peninsula at the side of a cliff surrounded by black water with a single dim lamp overhead. We cannot run and we cannot hide. My parents and my sister and her boyfriend may be in serious danger if we do. 11:30 p.m., we get another call from Gustavo.
There will be 3 boats coming. Just get in.
This is now obviously fucked. We are fucked. We are so fucked. Why the fuck are there 3 boats? Vincent and I are pretty skinny guys. There's no way we could fight more than one person. It's the perfect kidnapping, I thought to myself. Vince and I are weak young adults who come from apparent well-off families, who didn't tell anyone where they were going or what they were doing. Gustavo knew all of these things and obviously had the resources and connections to pull abduction off, or worse. I spot what appears to be a security guard making rounds down the beach a ways and immediately walk as fast as I can to him with Vincent. I explained, without using Gustavo's name, that we were supposed to be picked up by 3 boats and we feel extremely uncomfortable after recent events and just want to pay the boat captain and leave. My hope was that if we did get kidnapped, at least one person would know where the fuck we went or what happened to us. He assured us that no boats come around this time of night and we shouldn't wait too much longer. We walk not 100 feet before we get the single most chilling text I've ever read.
Did you just talk to the security?
Vince and I both froze and stared at each other for a few seconds. We decided to reply and said we were just chatting with him and heading back and that we can't go anymore because it's too late. He quickly replied,
"Don't worry, haha."
We replied, "Seriously, don't send the boats, we're not going anymore." Once again, his response was, "Don't worry, haha," followed by another "Don't worry, haha," and that was the last we heard of him. I've seen this shit in the movies. Coke dealers don't usually treat rats very nicely. Maybe Gustavo knew that I didn't use his name, and maybe that's why we were able to get out of that mess. Was the security guard in on it, or were we being watched the whole time? I will never know. Not knowing what to do, Vincent and I started climbing the few hundred stairs up to the mountain, back to our room with purpose. It was dark now, with the only occasional dim lamp along the way. Every single sound, every single movement in the surrounding jungle scared the living shit out of us. I've never felt this afraid in my entire life. We get back to the room, lock the door, and I go out to the patio, silently watch the climbable roofs like a fucking hawk. Vincent swears that he saw hands on the edge of the roof, but they were gone when I pointed my phone's flashlight at them. For the next 2 hours, I sat there, head on a swivel, ready to fucking scream to wake up my family and fight for my life. While freaking the fuck out, I saw a meteor burn up in the clear night sky, which was easily the highlight of my night. So that was pretty cool, I guess. Eventually, we figured it was over and went to bed. Relieved to wake up in the morning without my throat slit, I relaxed a bit. Luckily, we were checking out of the hotel at 11, so we wouldn't have to run into Gustavo again. Before leaving the resort, Vincent and I wandered down to the beach to kill some time. That's when 2 large native men that didn't appear to work at the resort approached us. The larger one said,
"Hey, are you the guys that were supposed to be on the boat last night? You know, Gustavo?"
I replied, "No," trying my best to sound confused.
"How much longer are you guys staying?"
he asked. "We're leaving in an hour," I replied. He looked at me with an "I know you're lying to me" face, held out his fist, grinned and said with a low voice,
"Safe trip home."
I bumped his fist and walked away, trying to stay cool. It felt like everyone who worked at the resort was looking at us and whispering about us for the next hour. I just wanted to get the fuck out. I didn't feel safe until we made it to the hour drive to the airport and got through security. Gustavo and your friends? Let's not meet again.
I've only ever mentioned this story in this video, but I'll never truly feel ready to go into details about what really happened that night on my YouTube channel. Just a warning, I'm no English major, so sorry if it goes off on tangents or doesn't make sense. but feel free to ask questions and I'll clear things up. Some names have been changed to protect the innocent. I was 18 at the time I got accepted into university. The same day, me and my then boyfriend got into a fight. I decided to have a few drinks with my cousin Becky, her boyfriend whom she had a child with, Eugene, his housemate, Ken, and the neighbor Hadley. Sounds like a safe scenario, right? Wrong. Around that night, we were all playing drinking games, and I thought I was having a ball in my best t-shirt without my boyfriend. This only being the second night I'd gone out since I'd moved out of my family's because of issues and only went to school, work, sports, school clubs, and the first night was going to my cousin's birthday. I noticed Ken kept staring at me the whole night, but I never tried anything, and Becky told me to stay away from him because he would sleep with anyone, including Hadley. I wasn't going to sleep with him because of a disagreement with my boyfriend. It got late. Becky asked if I wanted to stay at Dad's house while she was away or sleep in the spare room. I told her I felt a lot safer if I slept in the same room with her and Eugene, since I always got a creepy vibe in the spare room since it was small, cold, and cramped. My half-sister used to have the house before my cousin got it, and he used to be my half-sister's room. That was also where I watched The Exorcist. I didn't feel safe sleeping alone in my dad's house. Ken and Hadley slept on the couch. I noticed Ken kept following me around all night, making derogatory remarks. Later on in the night, Ken started licking and sucking on my feet and toes, and tries to move up. I'm paralyzed with fear because I only had one incident where I had almost gotten raped. Again, the first time I thought it was a safe environment with family. He tries to move up my leg. I pretend I'm trying to toss and turn and cover up my zipper of my pants. But he forcefully and quietly moves my hand away and goes back to sucking and licking on my feet. Eventually goes back to Hadley. I hear her giggling. Prepare myself for the worst and think if he comes back in here, I'll wake up my cousin. Of course he comes back in. I nudge and shove and shake my cousin's arm quietly, fearing Ken would do something violent if he found out. Turned out to be Eugene's. He grabs my hand. I squeeze it tightly, once again tossing and turning so Ken doesn't travel any further up my feet. Eugene apologizes when Ken leaves and tells him he didn't do anything and feels guilty. Maybe it's because Ken was bigger than him and he was under the influence of drugs. I didn't know he did crystal meth until later, but Eugene says he'll say something if he came back in. Yep, and he did. Eugene asks, "What the fuck are you doing in my room?" Ken nervously musters up and, "Oh, I'm sorry," and quickly walks off. This is now dawnbreak. Eugene profusely apologizes when I told him he could have woken up Becky. Then Eugene grabs my hand and I feel something erect. I pull my hand away. He tries it again. I move my hand away and tell him I gotta go back to my house. I take the longest shower of my life. Then I couldn't even wash the disgusting feeling I felt. I walked back to my home. I'm greeted with why it's my fault and I should have never left or fought or an argument, unfinished business with my boyfriend's mom. I burst out crying, tell her everything for the first time. She hugs me, they call the police, and report both of them. I never went to work that day. Around then, Ken decides to quickly move the fuck out. Eugene and Becky are confused and ask my cousin if it wasn't touching what I think it was, what the fuck was I touching then? That was so important that I had to remove my hands twice. Eugene wanted to talk to me, one-on-one, but I refused. 2 weeks and 2 days later, he hangs himself, writes a letter to my cousin. I had no idea I was actually at my dad's house at the time after another argument with my boyfriend. Eugene only lives next door. His workmates actually found him when he didn't show up to work for 2 to 3 days. My dad tricked me into going to Thailand, said it was my fault I almost got raped. He drugged me. I'll never know if this was true. Against my will, the police decided to drop the charges since I was living in another country. That was 7 years ago, I gotta say. Ken does a damn good job at hiding his tracks. While I was writing this story, I did manage to find his Facebook. Please do not mention that you found this story out of respect for my family, in case he finds my YouTube channel or Facebook and intends to hurt me. If you do, you're giving the perpetrator fuel and just as bad. I'm living in another country, but I'm still terrified of him in some ways, if he can get away with it once. I feel this sickening and horrifying sense of guilt about Eugene, since I was the one that reported him. I was responsible for his death. He was my niece's father. I love her so much, but I'll always be reminded for taking her dad away from her. Here's his Facebook. Worse has already been done to him, so don't try anything malicious. Months later in 2010, I was on visit to New Zealand. I found out the day we met Ken, he was staring at Becky. One day while she was sleeping in the same bed with Eugene, he was just staring at her. She woke up. She got lucky. I have to wonder how much worse the situation would have gotten if I slept in the spare room or went back to my house all alone. The moral of this story is no matter how safe or careful you are in an environment, you can never truly be sure, and people you think you can trust can be turned in a heartbeat.
I was seeing this guy Jack for a couple of months. and when I broke it off, I thought he was okay with it. He took it well, said he'd see me around, and we went our separate ways. I lived on a dead-end street at the very end of the street. I had huge windows and knew my neighbor's cars, and I knew Jack's car. About a week after we broke up, I started to see Jack drive by my apartment and quickly pull into the back parking lot that went the whole block, parallel to the street. Sometimes I would walk outside and see his car parked at the end of the street. I once circled the block and came up to his car and asked, "What the fuck are you doing here?" His response was something along the lines of, "Just seeing if you were home." "Okay, you fucking weirdo." I went back inside. At first I let it go. I was a full-time student and worked full-time, so I hardly had time to placate a man I wasn't interested in anymore. Not to mention I was young, 19, and I for sure didn't believe or think anything bad could happen to me. After a couple of weeks, it got a little creepy, and I would find things on my car or in my mailbox from Jack. Stuffed animals, candy with notes like, "Please don't leave me," or "I'll wait." Nothing too crazy or anything that scared me. He was a good-looking guy, had a good job, and took care of himself. How dangerous could he be? Jack started showing up in my school's gym and cafeteria. He didn't go to the college, and as far as I knew, had no reason to be there. He would just watch me, and a few times, he tried to corner me to talk to me or give me a hug. This is where I started to get a little freaked. I finally went to the cops because I was just tired of him always being around. Plus, I had started seeing a new guy, and it was always awkward for me to see Jack when I was holding hands with the new guy. He hadn't actually done anything illegal, but I lived alone, and far from any good friends or family at the time, so I was a little nervous. After I went to the police, he completely changed. He would drive up and down for hours around my block. I would see him at the grocery store or the local ice cream shop, like he knew my schedule. One day, I left to go for a run like I usually do. I always went around the same time in the late afternoon and always the same route. The neighborhood I lived in connected to the Horsemen's Association. They were allowed to have horses in the city proper, so, conveniently, there was a well-maintained path for them to use to get to the forest preserve. From the start of the trail in my neighborhood to the parking lot/trailhead was about 2 miles. It went through empty fields and retention ponds. No houses or other people, but that never bothered me. So, off I go into my own world as I concentrated more on the crunch of the gravel under my feet or the fall colors starting to pop. As I closed the distance to the trailhead, there were 4 cop cars just waiting. Weird for where I lived. Very low crime and a quiet part of town. A cop stops me and asks my name. I give it and he asks me to come with them. Now I am freaked. I was shitting bricks. Finally, we get to the station and they explain everything. Jack had been picked up for loitering and suspicious behavior. I happened to live across the street from the police chief of the town, whose house sided up to the entrance of that running path. He knew about Jack as I had mentioned about a month before, that someone kept coming by and hanging about. The police had noticed Jack's car earlier in the day, and when Jack spent hours hanging around, he got suspicious. He had Jack tracked down and asked him questions. He admitted to letting them search his car. They discovered that Jack had duct tape and a bottle of chloroform. I quickly moved.
This happened about a year ago in Seattle. I was managing a coffee shop just down the road from my apartment. An easy 15-minute walk most mornings, which I appreciated since I like to sleep in as much as I can. I had done this walk many times, leave at 5:45 and get to the cafe at 6 a.m. But what happened this morning would shake my comfort about early mornings, my neighborhood, and my city. Because I would sleep in so close to when I would have to leave, the walk to work would usually be the thing to wake me up. I stepped off the steps of my apartment building and maybe took 5 steps before feeling extremely uncomfortable. A man had just crossed the street and was walking towards me. Something in my body told me not to make eye contact with him. But just as passing, I couldn't resist and looked into his eyes. His eyes were piercing and my heart started to race. To the best of my abilities to describe him, he was at least 6 feet, wearing all black, a hoodie pulled over his head. But his eyes are what haunt me to this day. I wasn't sure if he was African American because his skin was black, and there were large white circles around his eyes, almost as if he had painted black onto his face, which I am certain to be the case. With that one glance, I knew something was wrong. I walked quickly and crossed the street to the other side. I glanced back and he was standing at the foot of the stairs of my apartment building. Certainly he had seen me come out of there. At this point, I was about a block away from him, hiding behind a tree in the doorway of another apartment building, calling my boyfriend over and over. I watched as he looked at my building for what felt like an hour, and proceeded down the sidewalk the opposite way I was walking. I was shaken and relieved. I was thinking about all the things I would have done, running to the police station that was 2 blocks away, calling the security guard I knew was working in the building I worked. All of these different things came to mind. I continued to walk down the block, but felt the urge to take a glance behind me, and thankfully I did. I couldn't see the man walking on the block. He surely would have still been on. I wasn't sure what to make of it until I saw him, on the same block as me, across the street, coming closer. I started to run and he matched my pace. I ran the 2 blocks to the police station, and he was gone. I went in and made a report and called the owner of the cafe to come get me. It took a while before I felt comfortable walking to work alone. Even alone, I couldn't listen to music or anything, always aware of my surroundings. Thankfully, I have never had another encounter with this man. So, weird creepy dude on 12th Ave, let's not ever meet again.
I've posted this story on Ask Reddit, but came across this sub and thought it would fit in. In my childhood neighborhood, my neighborhood's pool was larger than the other surrounding neighborhoods, so people often visited ours instead. When I was 8, I went to the pool with my sisters on the first day of summer, as I always did. When the lifeguards kicked all the kids out for the adult swim, I sat down on a pool chair next to my sisters. This guy, probably between 11 and 13, laid down on the chair next to me and said, "You're beautiful. Will you go out with me?" My sisters thought it was funny and teased me about it, so I just kind of laughed, but it made me uncomfortable. I was really shy back then, so I wrapped my body up in the towel I brought to cover my body, which he was staring at very openly. He introduced himself as Chris and kept trying to talk to me, and I was too shy to tell him to go away, so I let him keep the conversation going. Even though it made me uncomfortable, I soon forgot about it, until I went back to the pool next time. There he was, telling me how pretty I was, petting my hair, asking me to go out with him, and introducing me to his disabled grandmother, who brought him to the pool. Anyway, one day this girl came up to me and asked me if Chris was bothering me. I lied and said that I didn't really care, and she rolled her eyes and joked about how he used to ask her out too, and that she was glad he'd found someone else to pine over. The girl, Elizabeth, started hanging out with me when I went to the pool, which was almost every day since I was allowed to go by myself if I wanted. She explained to me that she and Chris were good friends from a different neighborhood, but came to our pool because it was bigger and had more room for his grandmother to work on physical therapy for her legs. We became great friends and laughed about how Chris was always following us around and asking me out. One day, I noticed that Chris followed me all the way back to my house and tried to hide behind a mailbox when I turned around. As funny as that sounds, I didn't think it was funny back then and rushed back into my house. I began to notice that he was getting more aggressive and annoyed with me for refusing to date him. He started asking me to go on walks with him through the park and brought his grandmother so I didn't feel like I could say no. He would take me into the woods or behind the jungle gym, out of sight from his grandmother, and make creepy comments about my body and touch my cheek while telling me how pretty I was. He'd pet my hair and try to bounce the curls, like stretching out a spring and watching it curl up again, his grandmother would offer to let me sit on her lap during these walks while she controlled her wheelchair, which made me feel really uncomfortable because I didn't know her well, and being a stupid, ignorant 8-year-old, I thought her atrophied legs were a little gross. He continued to follow me home, even when I took shortcuts through the woods or the long way that led in circles. His presence began to make me nervous because I wasn't sure what would happen if I continued to turn him down. I started avoiding the pool when his grandmother's handicap van was there, but I'm pretty sure he just fixed that by showing up later than usual, so I'd already be there when he arrived. All of my friends, including Elizabeth, thought it was so funny, so I never told them I didn't want to go to the pool anymore, and never brought it up to my sisters or parents. So if someone asked me to go with them, I'd just go and hope he wasn't there. Finally, during the last week the pool was open, I went to the bathroom. The bathrooms are a bit off to the side of the pool and closed off with a large heavy metal door, so kids don't sneak in and vandalize it at night. The second I entered, the door shut behind me and the lights turned off. Then I heard Chris say, "I'm not letting you out until you agree to go out with me," and he locked the door. The bathroom was cold and pitch black, and I was terrified of the dark at the time. The tile was that disgusting, slimy, wet feeling that tile gets when it's wet, with bits of dirt and sand on it, which is why I never liked going in there in the first place. It also smelled like chlorine and a typical subpar public restroom, stuff of nightmares for an 8-year-old. I started banging on the door and screaming for help, but nobody could hear me because of the really heavy door in the location. But then some angry soccer mom started screaming at me to stop pranking her and how much trouble I was in. Turns out that she'd been locked in there too, and was mad that while she was peeing, the lights turned off. She called for help with her phone, and I was eventually let out of the bathroom. Being 8, I didn't think much about it, but now I realize how creepy the whole situation was. I should have told someone the first time he followed me home, and it never occurred to me to just stop going to the pool. The lifeguard stopped allowing people from other neighborhoods due to an unrelated series of break-ins, and I'd heard that he was banned from the pool for locking me and the mom in the bathroom. But the next summer, I saw a boy who looked just like Chris but taller, and with blonde streaks dyed into his hair. It might have been his brother or a spot-on look-alike, but I never went to that pool again after that, and I never met Chris or Elizabeth again.
Some background info. I attended a private high school, but our tuition did not cover the school trips and the like. This incident took place during the summer of my junior year, during the last few months of school. During high school, I was part of the Language National Honor Society, a club that will only let you in if you have an A and are overall level 3. 3 years of language study in a non-English language. Mine was Japanese. I had taken several classes over the summer and tested from level 2 to level 4. I was ecstatic to join the club and do all the activities advertised, including traveling to our respective countries of study. That meant if I kept my grades up, I would be able to travel to Japan just over summer for a home stay. Part of the way us students raised money for our trips was to recycle all of the school's recycling and turn it in for a collective fund. Again, private high school. I guess we just did things differently. Anyway, the jobs for recycling were divided between the students who sorted the recycling and dug through the trash at school, and ones who drove the bags of bottles to the local recycling center. I was in the latter group, since my family owned a Suburban, which could fit most of the bags in one trip, with all the other seats down. So during late April, early June, I was signed up to take the bags. My mom offered to drive, since she wanted to use the truck to go shopping later in the day. It was surprisingly hot for the west side of Oregon. I was dressed in jean short shorts and a t-shirt and sneakers. No way I was going to wear flip-flops at the center, even with the heat. Old soda feels disgusting as it dries between your toes, trust me. At this time, my mom and I were not in a good spot in our relationship. We butted heads over every little thing, including recycling. She couldn't understand why I insisted on going to the recycling center early in the week. It was wasting time because she needed to buy something for one of my siblings' school projects. If you want, you can just drop me off. I'll grab a soda or something and text you when I'm done or walk home, I said, annoyed. She sighed. I'll wait around for a bit. When we reached the center, which was connected to a QFC, she parked one row from the entrance and I hopped out, dragging 3 huge bags with me. I returned to the car to grab the second batch when I felt it. That tingle go up your spine when someone is watching you. I frowned and then looked around. There was no one around really, except for an elderly looking old man sitting in his car in the row behind us. He was looking right at me. I did a quick check to make sure there was no soda streak on my bare legs. Shit, there's a hole in my shorts. Jerk. So go ahead and laugh at the dumb teenager with bright pink panties. He wasn't laughing, but I was more embarrassed by the staring than creeped out. With a huff and a grumble, I dragged the remaining bags to the recycling center. It's a small open room that you can see into from the parking lot. Recycling machines lined the walls, and I got to work. A few minutes pass, and I get a text from my mom. I'm going ahead to the mall. Text me when you're on your way home. I don't want you waiting around for me to pick you up. Great, I text back. A few more minutes later, and I hear a car pulling up into the parking spot right in front of the recycling center opening. I look up as a reflex, and I felt my heart sink. It's the old man from before. The tingle down my spine is made of ice this time, settling in my gut. This was not okay. The man was watching me. Even if he was waiting for somebody, why not remain in his original spot? Why pull up in front and park instead of driving closer to the grocery store entrance? Still, I try to ignore it. That is, until I hear a creak of door hinges. My head snaps up, and I see the man has opened his door and has one leg sticking out. I text my mom, "Can you come back?" She asks why. There's this guy watching me and is creeping me out. Just go tell one of the employees if he's really bothering you. You're young. I'm sure you can outrun them anyways. Yeah, thanks, Mom. The man hasn't gotten out of his car yet. He's just sitting there, watching me. Watching me stand there with my phone in my hand. That's when I noticed a very rhythmic movement of one of his arms. Hell no. Abandoning my bottles and walking out of the recycling center and heading towards the entrance of the QFC. As I pass the car, I can't help but look, just to make sure I'm right. And lo and behold, the man is sitting there half out of his car watching me. He's exposed and pleasuring himself. That sight makes my lip curl in disgust. I hurry into the QFC and tell the first employee I see what's going on. She just says, "Oh, that's gross," and walks away. Yeah, fuck you too, lady. I feel gross. Violated almost. It makes my skin crawl, but I'm too nervous to go back out of the store again. I linger by the doors like a creep myself. Nervous. After about 5 minutes, another employee, a man this time, comes up to me and asks if I'm lost, and reminds me that there's no loitering in the store. I have no choice but to go back out again. Thankfully, the man is gone. I finish the recycling, turn in the receipt for cash, buy the damn soda and walk home. I never saw that man again, and opted for sorting bottles at the school instead of taking them to the recycling center. On the plus side, my relationship with my mother has gotten a lot better since. The downside, it wasn't the last, or even the most extreme creepy encounter I've experienced.
When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a good reputation for crime or danger. However, the neighbourhood I lived in was usually considered one of the good neighbourhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls. Anyway, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition, and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things, and make promises to get stuff fixed, but never really got around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor. My front door was immediately on the left as you walk into the building's door from the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area with only one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs, was huge and heavy and was never locked. In fact, you couldn't lock it. And in fact, it didn't even close all the way. So basically, the door to my apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night, I was getting home from work and it was very late, about 3:45 AM. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was open really late every night. And I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV before I went to bed. I'd also gotten totally naked, something I truly loved being able to do, considering I lived alone. Haha. Anyway, not even 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I heard 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building's front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put a robe on and slowly crept towards the door, which, by the way, was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I just had to kind of take a leap of faith and open the door. When I did, a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man stood staring down at me, with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing he said was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely open, I got a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, what's up? He just stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said, "I've seen you around," and started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous. "Yeah, I've been watching you, and I like the way you look," he said. "So you gay? Bisexual?" I was just like, "I dunno, but it's late and I'm going to bed. Bye." He kind of nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hand still on the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened. Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment winding down by myself after I had a few friends over drinking and smoking a little bit, as college kids will do. All of a sudden, I heard a weird rattling noise coming from across the room, so I turned off the music I was playing, to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second, and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Like a deer in headlights, I was frozen, staring at the things wiggle and shake, until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and sawed to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock, forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped for a second, because whoever it was clearly knew that I knew. It was only a second though, because they started struggling again, and I had to use all my might to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my ribcage, and after about 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder, it suddenly stopped, and I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps run down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralysed with my hands at the door for a good while before I realised I was crying and shaking and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police. In hindsight, I regret this for the following reasons. I was basically having a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911 and actually threw up during the call. And I think that's when they decided I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened, as I'm shaking and crying. I noticed at one point that they're both smirking and laughing, and I say, "What's funny right now?" One of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I was just like, okay, and basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they say they weren't going to charge me with anything. Just take my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides keep your door locked. I was devastated and felt so helpless. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep the last part short. Basically, this same scenario happened one more time about 2 weeks from the last time. Only, instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour, which is a 2-hour drive from his house to this place. And he had a crowbar up his sleeve, haha. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten there, whoever it was had already left. They didn't struggle very hard this time. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and a peephole on my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time. And I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminium baseball bat to protect myself with, so I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks, and if it was the guy who had come to my door the first time. But whoever it was, let's not meet.
When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a reputation for crime and danger. However, the neighborhood I lived in was usually considered one of the good neighborhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls. Anyway, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things and make promises to get stuff fixed, but never really got around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor. My front door immediately on the left as you walked in the building's door to the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area, with only one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs was huge and heavy and never locked. In fact, you couldn't lock it, and in fact, it didn't even close all the way. So basically, the door to my apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night I was getting home from work and it was very late, about 3:45 a.m. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was open really late every night. And I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV before I went to bed. I had also gotten totally naked, something I truly loved being able to do considering I lived alone. Anyway, not 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I hear 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building's front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put a robe on and slowly crept towards the door, which by the way was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I just had to kind of take a leap of faith and open the door. And when I did, a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man stood staring down at me with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing he said was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely open, I got a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, what's up?" He just stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said, "I've seen you around," and started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation and I was starting to get nauseous. "Yeah, I've been watching you, and I like the way you look," he said. "So you gay? Bisexual?" I was just like, "I don't know, but it's late and I'm going to bed. Bye." He kind of nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. And once I did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hands still on the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened. Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment winding down by myself after I had had some friends over drinking and smoking a little bit, as college kids will do. All of a sudden, I hear a weird rattling noise coming from across the room, so I turned off the music I was playing to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Like a deer in headlights, I was frozen staring at the things wiggle and shake until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and soared to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock and forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jingling of the lock and knob stopped for a second because whoever it was clearly knew now that I knew. It was only a second though before they just started struggling again, and I had to use all my might just to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my rib cage, and after about 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder, it suddenly stopped, and I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps run down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralyzed with my hands on the door for a good while before I realized I was crying and shaking and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police, and in hindsight I regret this for the following reasons. I was having basically a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911 and actually threw up during the call. And I think that's when they decided I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened, as I'm shaking and crying. I noticed at one point they're both smirking and laughing, and I say, "What's funny right now?" And one of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I was just like, okay, and basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of my shit from my apartment and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they said they weren't going to charge me with anything, just take my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides, keep your doors locked. I was devastated and felt so helpless. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep this last part short. Basically, this same scenario happened one more time about 2 weeks from the last time. Only instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour, 2-hour drive from his place to this place, with a crowbar up his sleeve. Unfortunately, by the time he'd gotten there, whoever it was had already left. They didn't struggle very hard this time. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and a peephole on my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time, and I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminum baseball bat to protect myself with, so I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks and if it was the guy who would come to my door the first time, but whoever it was, let's not meet.
This took place several years ago, when I was 18, freshly enrolled in college. I grew up in an extremely strict household, Asian female by the way. My parents set my curfew at 8 p.m. I wasn't allowed to drive at night or go to parties, etc., all because my family was convinced that all of these situations led to rape. Anyway, you could see how I once moved out of the house, I was relished in my opportunity to exercise my new freedom and independence. One night around 11 p.m. I got super hungry and had a real craving for Arby's roast beef sandwich. My roommate was tired and didn't want to go with me, so I hopped in my car and decided to go make a quick trip by myself. To get to Arby's, I had to take a stretch of the road that was really secluded and not well lit, of course at the time of night. There were barely any cars on the road. At the stoplight just a few blocks away from the Arby's, I was the third car waiting at the red light. Car A was very front, car B was behind it, and I was behind car B. There was a last car, car C, that's behind me. All of a sudden I guess he must have thought that the light turned but is still red. The car in front of me stepped on the gas and lurched forward, tapping into the back of the car in front of him. The two drivers immediately got out and started looking at the damage. Neither of them were hurt, and there was little to no damage that I could see made to either car. I had no idea what to do in this situation. Again, I was a dumb 18-year-old, just got injected into the adult world, and I had never witnessed an accident of any kind before. Was I supposed to stick around as a witness or something? I wasn't sure, but I felt uneasy about the idea of getting out of my car in the middle of the night on a really isolated road to talk to two guys, especially when I didn't think they needed my intervention at all. Again, it was a super minor fender bender, and they were talking really civilly, though they didn't move their cars. So the light turned green, I decided to move over into the other lane and proceed on my way. Again, this may have been the wrong thing to do, but I didn't know any better. The car that had been behind me didn't like the fact that I was trying to leave. To this day, I have no idea what they were thinking. At the time, they must have thought I caused the accident or something. Anyway, as I shifted over into the other lane to leave, they started blasting their horns at me. I got super scared and proceeded down the road, past the green light. And car C, the one behind me, took off after me. What ensued was still the most terrifying experience I've ever had. The car, which I could dimly see had 2 male figures in front seat, followed me closely for quite a while, occasionally blasting their horns aggressively. They would speed up until they were just about to hit the back of my car when I was starting to get really freaked out, so started making random turns to lose them, or to see if they were really following me. They definitely were. I made 3 left turns and they were still on my tail. Eventually the car pulled over into the lane beside me and kept speeding and nudging into my lane, as if to cut me off or run me off the road. I was actually crying now and called my then boyfriend, telling him what was happening. I initially wanted to drive to his house, but then I realized I didn't want these psychos knowing where he lived. I tried to avoid making eye contact with the 2 men in the car beside me, and tried not to let them imitate me off the road. They kept blaring the horn, and then eventually the driver rolled down the window. I was too scared to talk to him, but I could hear what he screamed clearly through my window, which had a slight gap in the top that never sealed up. "We're gonna catch you, bitch, and I'm gonna rape your dumb ass." I think the guy next to him said something like, "Don't slow down" or something, but I couldn't hear it clearly over the rushing of the wind and the sounds of our cars accelerating. My boyfriend heard them shouting over the phone and directed me to the nearest police station, which was about 8 minutes away from where I was. It was actually hard for him to find the police station to give me any directions to it because he had no idea where I was. 2 guys kept shouting things at me, but I didn't know what was said. I was too busy blubbering to my boyfriend. Maybe it was really hard to remember what went on in those moments. Physically, I was speeding so fast to try to get away from those guys. At this point, I was just hoping a cop would stop me. There were no cars on any of the roads we went down, and it just made everything worse. And then my phone battery decided it was time to die. I seriously thought it was one of those horror stories my parents had always told me about. Eventually, I finally saw the police station my boyfriend had given me directions to. Almost drove past it. Turned into the parking lot, the car followed me and the passenger door actually opened before the car even stopped. But I think they noticed where we were and drove out of there fast. I sat in my car too terrified to get out because I thought moving would provoke them into coming back. Literally 60 seconds later, my boyfriend pulled into the parking lot next to my car and climbed out with a baseball bat. He held me for a little while, and then a cop who was pulling into the lot or something coming out of the building approached us and asked if everything was okay. Turns out that the car had tailed me fit the description of a car that had apparently scared a girl so badly, same type of thing, late night, empty road, lone driver, super aggressive driving, and screaming, that she had crashed her car into a tree divider trying to get away from those guys. Neither she or I got the license plate, though, and to this day, I don't know if they ever caught those guys. I don't know what kind of human being gets their kicks out of terrorizing female drivers late at night on the road, but whoever they were, fuck those guys. I hope someone somewhere managed to put a stop to them.